I'm taking something natural and turning it into something that's very unnatural.
It's okay. That's how we always start.
Anything I'm going to do is going to be huge.
I will not miss it, I promise.
Oh dear, don't bother coming back, you know.
One more try and then I'll
Okay.
give up. Hello. Art in Adelaide is spending this beautiful sunny morning at Campbelltown Arthouse with Alan Todd at his exhibition Myth and Metamorphosis. Hi, Alan.
Good morning.
I'm very curious. Why did you decide to call your exhibition Myth and Metamorphosis? And what is hidden behind this beautiful name?
A myth essentially is a story we create to explain the inexplicable. And a metamorphosis is change. Maybe the metamorphosis part is easier to work with. Because of the materials I'm working with, you think wood starts from a tree. I'm taking something natural and turning it into something that's very unnatural. And the degree of change that's possible with that, not all materials work that way. When you have like stone or clay, you tend to work with the materials and try and maintain as much of the natural characteristics. Well, what I've got here doesn't do that at all. I'm taking materials and doing something completely different with them. So it's not so much about the materials, about the idea that's within them. Now, the myth part, in fact, is more to do with the paintings next door. When I first went to Port Adelaide in about, 1993 or thereabouts, there were still sailing ships. It wasn't an active port, but there was definitely signs of the whole history of the port there. When I first went down there, though, I did a series of drawings of what I thought was interesting, which was the black woodwork in the river and whatever else. But it gradually evolved, and going back a second time, all that was left was bare concrete. And some of the wood was still there, but everything had been removed. It had been cleaned up. The sailing club on the opposite side from the lighthouse had gone, and it was just mud and barbed wire. What we've got left here is just remnants to tell a story. I've seen photographs of the port when there were hundreds of sailing ships. It's all gone. The ocean liners that turn up there as well. I guess we're now telling ourselves a story about part of history. That's the myth part.
Yeah, it's interesting interpreting because I had no idea what is hidden behind the name. And talking about all these metamorphoses happen to your artworks. What are they away from just pure idea to final product? How do you work on your pieces?
People have said to me, are you an oil painter? I say, look, I don't even think in those terms. I have a series of ideas that I've worked with for the last, 5, 6 decades. And I come back to them periodically. The forms may change, but I can recognize things that I've got in this room that I was doing 50 years ago. It's not a repetition, but it's a feeling basically about the way I draw more than anything else. The collective of black ones over in the corner here, they probably evolved from my evolution of handwriting. We went at school from dipping a pen with a nib on the end of it into an inkwell. Horrible stuff to work with, it just got everywhere. But when we went from that to the invention of a biro, then that basically changed what I could do. I could draw fluid lines that didn't have to stop. And once I started doing that, it never changed. And those fluid lines are here in every piece of work in one way or another. Whether I translate them as bits of wire or metal tubing or plastic tubing, it's a line moving in space.
It's interesting how your handwriting had an evolution to sculptural piece.
I don't think there's any distinction between them. One flows from the other. They're not separate. You can't separate the things in your life from what you create.
Can you tell us about what art experience you had in your life?
I was at art school for 4 years in London at a time of peace, love, and the whole hippie thing. I left London even before the next stage came in where all the punk rockers suddenly arrived. For that time, all of the art that came into the art school was American. I know there was British art and it was there before that, but no one talked about it. unless it was Francis Bacon or Henry Moore, what they were talking about was American and the beginnings of abstraction. I largely ignored all of that. I've always thought that there was something about British art that was much more me. Coming to Australia, well, that was something different. Going into a country town where there was no art, and they all thought art had stopped at the end of the 19th century, there was really no one to talk to. There has been a number of changes of medium. I spent much of the 80s making metal sculpture. It didn't look like what anybody else was trying to do, and inevitably I really didn't know what I was doing. I guess there was always this feeling of wanting to use materials that suited me. Wood is a new thing, but somewhere between the 80s and 5 years ago, much of what I did was in theatres. The idea of moving forms in space. I was using dancers as the equivalent of brushstrokes. I was always looking at the stage from above. Even when I was sitting out in the audience, I was seeing the patterns of movement on the floor. And often we used the floor as well. For one of those, I turned the entire floor into a Mondrian painting using squares of light. Came and went. We did lots of things like that. I was never interested in traditional ballet or anything like that, but contemporary dance seemed a natural way to go for what I could actually do with it, what I could use. So that combination of lights, sound, we created our own soundtracks. For the most part we did. And again, we're combining elements to create an idea more than anything else. That constant shift from one thing to another, there are definite things within each of those mediums, and the way I approach things, I can trace them back 5 and 6 decades. It's the same way of doing things. So it may look like something very different, but really it isn't.
But the idea behind could
the
be
ideas
the same.
remain the same, yes, they do. In recent years, I've been going outside and doing installations out in the landscape. That's very different from working in a studio and trying to think, how is this going to work? You need scale for a start in most places. When we go back out to Palma again next year, that's a 400-acre site, and a single piece will get lost out there quite easily. So anything I'm going to do is going to be huge, as will the next one be. The owner of that site is Greg Johns, the international sculptor. He was very proud of the fact that he'd taken a denuded landscape and that the birds had returned. I don't know how many thousands of trees he's planted there, but he said he counted 15 species. Now, my immediate thought was, I can't cope with 15 species, but maybe with one. And then I combined that with what I see every Christmas over my house. All these white galahs turn up, thousands of them, and they're wheeling over the house all the time, a huge flock. So there will be white birds. I'm going to cut them out of plywood, mount them on a stake about that high off the ground, but there will be anything up to 200 of them. If you stood there all day, you'd see the light moving east-west over them, so the shadow will shift. Seen from a distance, they would look like a flock of birds rising off the hill. But each bird is going to have a word attached to it. I've got a combination of flight words, so some nouns, some verbs, some adverbs. So depending where you stand in relation to them, you can actually compose a haiku. And it will shift every time you walk around. So there's 200 words out there, so there's any number of opportunities to compose your own poem.
So it's play of light, of shapes, of words?
Well, there'll be sound as well, because the wind whistles through there all the time. This will be big. It will be big.
I will not miss it, I promise.
It's no smaller than what I did last year. I looked up into the sky in March. What I could see was the constellation Orion right over my house. You could see Orion's belt, you could see the stars. There are 7 points there that make up the whole constellation. And I thought, well, if I can see that, everybody else can too. So I thought, what if I create that on the ground like it's an ancient monument? So I went out there, got a compass, and I lined it 58 degrees north, because that is where Orion will be going. So the exhibition finishing was the end of Orion as it moved into the northern hemisphere. That was big. It's a big piece out there on the landscape. I like that idea.
It sounds like you have some quite serious preparation for doing your installation of sculptures, and it sounds like you have some quite serious engineering design for them. How do you work on them?
There is always consideration of materials and what they will do. With any of the ones I've got here, though, I didn't start with a plan, and I basically never do. I draw things, but what I end up with, it won't be completely different, but there will be an evolution in the course of making it. The engineering part is to understand what the materials won't do, and wood is particularly unforgiving, particularly this kind of wood anyway. I've got down to a state with these where they're really as thin as they can possibly be. They don't take much to break. Wood, you know, there's very little available. Sometimes I'm envious of European sculptors. They've got, you know, walnut and linden wood and whatever, and it's just lying around, and cedar. What have we got here? We've got Pinus radiata and not much of anything else.
Pine and gum.
Well, that's it, yeah. And in big sheets, it simply doesn't exist. With everything here coming from somewhere like Bunnings, because it's the only real source of wood, it's increasingly a case of amalgamated bits glued together. It's a problem. Mm-hmm. But I've pushed it as far as I can with these. I'm not sure there's any further they can go.
And how do you protect your pieces for outdoor installation or outdoor exhibitions?
The wood has to be sealed to start with. They're always painted. I can't leave wood out in its natural state, not what I'm using anyway. It simply wouldn't survive. Most of these exhibitions are of limited time, so for a month or two, it's not bad. Although having said that, I was out in the Barossa, 3 years ago, and I experimented. I took two very tall pieces and put them in the garden area outside the gallery. A month later, there was nothing left. The wind had stripped them. Everything was off and lying on the ground. You know, I learned a lot from that. Obviously, you know, the Barossa is a very windy place, but you know, the strength of the wind going through there, it just destroyed everything. I guess Parma's not much different. It can't be so fragile it's going to fall apart. It can't not have a protective surface on it. There are various commercial paints that are supposed to stand up to 25 years of weather, so that's fine.
So commercial paints for
it has to be,
for
yes.
houses and...
That's the stuff, yes.
Oh.
Well, if they say it will protect your house for 25 years, surely a sculpture for a while.
So it's nothing about art materials?
I've got plenty of those as well, but okay, they've all got limitations. Now, the number of people that say, oh, do you like oil paint or acrylic? I say, it depends what I'm trying to do with it.
Yeah.
It's not a favourite. But, you know, if you want something that's going to happen quickly, acrylic is the way to go. If you want something with denser colour, it has to be oil paint, and you have to put up with the drying time. It depends what it is.
Normally, artists produce lots of artworks, and honestly, not all of them are sold, or artists just don't want to sell some pieces which they attach to. And for some artists, it became like mental block to make more because they run out of storage. Did you meet this problem?
I ran out of storage a long time ago. I built the house that I'm in about 8 years ago. So I built a workshop on the ground floor and a studio on the top floor, and the rest of it is house. At the moment, there are well over 100 large paintings stored in a rack, and all the sculptures that aren't here are standing out on the driveway and right across the front of the house, and I don't know what to do with them.
Oh.
I don't.
It looks like a museum, not like a real house.
It looks a bit like that, yeah, it does.
Like a gallery.
It's just something I have to accept. I'll repurpose one, cut it up and do something else with it. But I want to try and create some sort of continuity. That feeling that I want to be able to see where I've come from before I move forward. So trying to retain enough pieces that suggest that. So, I don't know. I've got nowhere to put anything. All this stuff's got to go back home shortly.
But it did not stop you from making...
It's never stopped me.
That's great.
No, it's not that.
Did you meet some difficulties as an artist during your practice?
All right, there are a couple of things. One thing Australia has plenty of are art competitions. I don't know how many in the course of a year, but we're talking hundreds. Every time I think about entering one of those, I look at the criteria and I thought, I'm just wasting my time. They are all so narrow in their focus. It's got to be a watercolour, or it's got to be something else, or it's the Parklands theme. And I thought, well, I've got nothing to offer with any of that. So that whole side of the art market, it's not exactly closed, but I just don't know what to do with it. Yeah. That's one thing. Another is that for all the time I was working in theatre, it was collaboration. And obviously now I'm working as a solo artist. The idea of being able to talk to people about art, and particularly other artists, it's more difficult than you think it is. I regularly try to contact artists and say, look, I'd love to have a chat about what you're doing. And inevitably, they just bring the shutters down and say, oh, no, too busy. That's a problem, because there's no real place you can go to find groups of artists other than, the studio complexes around the city. And just dropping in there, people get very defensive when you do that. I know a number of artists working in those situations, but they're just not comfortable talking about what they're doing. Largely, you're just on your own now. And even the way you have to market yourself, you're on your own. Whether you're doing it through an exhibition or through digital media or anything like that, online galleries, it's still essentially, it's a solo activity. Once upon a time, we had dozens of galleries here. We're now down to a handful. They're all in some way specialized. So tapping into any of that means you've actually got to have something that a gallery owner thinks is saleable. Now, once you start going down that path and thinking, oh, I've got to produce work that's going to sell, in some way it destroys what you're trying to do. You can't actually manufacture art for an audience. All you can do is do what you're doing and then hoping that somebody appreciates it or understands it or something. Getting out of Australia, that's even more difficult. There are galleries all over the world. New York is full of them. But the most prohibitive thing is the cost of moving work across the world. Last year, I was in contact with a New York gallery. We agreed on one piece being sent there. The bill for that was $8,000 to send it from a carrier here on its stretcher to New York, and then the same to come back if it didn't sell. That's just prohibitive. To have to then put a price on it, you suddenly think, well, I'm thinking 16,000 Australian. Even if you convert that to American, it's still a lot of money.
Yes.
And you're still going to make a profit, and so's the gallery, and you're suddenly, you're out of the market. You can enter international competitions, but, again, you're a long way away. Even national ones here, sending work to Sydney, I can tell you what that costs as well by courier. It's just too much to even consider. I keep putting myself out there in terms of, organizations around the world, but nothing has actually worked yet.
These particular sculptures at this exhibition, they look more like for interior.
I think they are, yes.
Yeah. In which interior you see them?
I'm thinking about foyers where they become, an object that stands there to be looked at.
Yeah, these ones could be great in hotels,
They could be.
Yeah,
So,
maybe in some offices.
I think so, yes. That's been suggested a number of times. I just don't know who to talk to.
Hopefully, maybe someone watching our interview can help you in this matter.
Well, may well be.
Because, guys, they're just amazing.
And there are lots of offices in Adelaide that have got nothing in the foyer at all.
And some office could be the first one buying these beautiful sculptures. Thank you so much, Alan, for your time and for interesting stories you told us.
Thank you for having me.
If someone reminds me how to say this word, I can start.
Meta means big or great. Morphosis means change.